Welcome back, listeners, to another week and another edition of Interventions and Detentions. I'm your host, Brad. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for dropping by for another episode. This is episode 220. Man, we're at 20 already. The year is just flying by, and it just started. It's January. Hey, this week's topic, and maybe I guess I should say title of this episode, is Classroom Management Didn't Fail. The Social Contract Did. Gonna get deep with you today, boys and girls. If you're listening to this episode as a teacher, maybe an administrator, even support staff, maybe a parent who pays attention to what's happening in schools, I want to start by saying this. You're not imagining things. Something feels different, a little bit heavier, a little more fragile. And it's not because educators suddenly forgot how to manage classrooms, because that's what we're going to talk about today. It's not about that. This week, I came across a post on Facebook, and it wasn't flashy, it wasn't angry, and it wasn't trying to start a fight or anything, but it stopped me in mid-scroll. And not because it shocked me, because it named something that educators have been carrying quietly for a long time. And here's the line that did it all for me. Classroom management didn't fail. The social contract did. The title of this week's podcast. That sentence isn't a complaint. It's not blame shifting. It's not anti-student. It's not anti-teacher. It, to me, is a little bit of a diagnosis. And today, I want to talk about why that distinction matters. Because I think we've been blaming the wrong thing, asking the wrong questions, and putting the weight of a cultural failure on the shoulders of individual teachers, which really isn't fair. This episode's not about lowering expectations. It's not about excusing behavior. We don't want to do that. It's not about longing for some imaginary golden age, like I remember back when, or the way I used to do things back in my day. It's not about that. It's about understanding what classroom management was built on and what happens when that foundation quietly erodes. Classroom management didn't suddenly break. Let's start with something that needs to be said clearly. Classroom management did not suddenly become a problem. It didn't start with cell phones. It didn't start with social media. It didn't even start with COVID. Classroom management is something that has always been hard and challenging for teachers. And teachers have dealt with it with things like talking out of turn, students pushing the limits, testing their boundaries, disengagement from instruction, disrespectful moments. All those things, they're not new. What was stable for a very long time was the environment surrounding those moments. Classroom management was never just a bag of tricks. It wasn't just about proximity, standing a little bit closer, maybe they'll stop doing what they're doing, or your tone, or seating charts, or incentives. It rested on something far, far more important. It was more about a shared agreement. Not written, not posted on the board, not explicitly taught by the teacher, but widely understood. Adults set limits, students test them, and the system backs the adult while learning happens. That backing didn't mean teachers were always right. It meant enforcement itself was legitimate and enough. And that legitimacy made everything else possible. The difference between pushback and collapse. Students have always pushed back. That's part of growing up as a kid. It's developmentally appropriate. I think in a way we want them to push back a little bit. We need them to push back to show that they're growing. What's different now is what happens after that pushback. There used to be an assumption by students, families, and the broader system that an adult enforcing a rule deserved, some level of baseline dignity, let's say. Not necessarily agreement, not praise, just that level of respect. You could be upset. You could complain later. You could involve parents or administrators. But in that moment, the rule existed. And the adult enforcing it was treated like the problem. That courtesy is what is disappearing, in my opinion. And when courtesy disappears, everything else escalates. Courtesy is not obedience, though. Let me be clear. Courtesy does not mean blind obedience. It does not mean fear. It does not mean silence. It means recognizing that adults that are enforcing expectations are doing legitimate work. Courtesy sounds like, I don't agree, but okay. This isn't fair, but I'll deal with it. Can my parent talk to someone later? All those things. What courtesy doesn't sound like is things like immediate defiance, public confrontation, that happens often, personal attacks, accusations of intent, maybe. And when enforcement itself is treated as aggression, the entire system destabilizes. Because now every correction is a potential conflict. What changed wasn't kids, it was the context. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Get ready, here it comes. Students didn't wake up one day and decide adults had no authority. They learned it from a culture that surrounds them where authority is constantly questioned. Think about that. Not just in schools, everywhere. Authority is constantly questioned. Accountability is framed as harm sometimes. Boundaries are portrayed as oppression. We're going to keep the man down. Consequences are negotiable, and schools didn't cause that shift. But schools are definitely absorbing the impact of it. That's the part we keep missing. From inconvenience to incident. 10 years ago, enforcing a phone policy was inconvenient. It might lead to frustration, eye-rolling, maybe a complaint at home. But today, enforcing that same rule can be an incident. It can be a confrontation in the classroom, maybe a refusal by the student, maybe a recording of the situation by another student and a social media post online. Again, the rule didn't change. The rule stayed the same. The risk is what changed. And when risk enters the room, behavior changes. Not just student behavior, mind you, but the adult behavior too. Teachers now have to calculate that risk. Is it worth it? This is where classroom management truly has to shift and has shifted. Teachers now have to do something classroom management was never designed to include. And they have to calculate that personal risk now. Before enforcing a rule, many teachers silently ask themselves, is this worth the escalation? Will I be supported? Will this come back on me? Is it safer just to let it go? That question alone erodes consistency. Not because teachers don't care, because humans adapt to danger. And fear is not a management strategy. No amount of professional development prepares our teachers to manage fear. Fear changes tone, fear changes timing, and fear changes follow-through. And fear, my friends, spreads. When teachers see colleagues questioned, criticized, or left exposed for enforcing expectations, the message is clear. Hold that line carefully, or don't hold it at all. This is where the narrative breaks. This is the point where we usually say, they need better classroom management. But that explanation doesn't hold up, because what we're describing isn't a lack of skill. It's a lack of security. You cannot strategy your way out of a broken social contract. You cannot relationship build, and I'm doing air quotes there, relationship build your way out of an unsupported authority. And no classroom management framework accounts for a system that hesitates when enforcement becomes uncomfortable. This isn't where the story ends, though, folks, but it's where the misunderstanding truly begins. Now, I want to talk about what replaces the foundation, because when the social contract erodes, it doesn't leave a vacuum. It leaves fear. And that fear, again, is not just an emotional response. Fear reshapes the system. Fear changes how teachers teach. When enforcement carries risk, teachers begin to adapt. Not consciously at first, though. More so quietly. They stop addressing certain behaviors. They begin to delay interventions. They let the small things slide a little bit, not because they believe those things don't matter, but because the cost of addressing them feels way too high. It's not worth it. This is how consistency creeps in. Not through laziness, not through apathy, but through self-protection on the part of the teacher. And when students sense that inconsistency, they push harder and harder and harder. Not because they're bad kids necessarily, but because uncertainty invites that testing, the pushing of the limits. Well, let's go back to that phone policy again for just a moment. Let's talk about phones, because they're the clearest example of this shift. Phone policy existed 10 years ago. Phones were disruptive then too. They always have been. But enforcing those policies didn't really feel dangerous 10 years ago. Today, the same enforcement can escalate instantly. A teacher asks for the phone. Student refuses. Voices rise. Peers pull out cameras. Someone says, "You can't touch my property." And suddenly, a moment that should have taken 10 seconds becomes a defining event. That's not classroom management failure, folks. That's a cultural one. Here's where things get really fragile. When enforcement escalates, teachers look to the system, okay? They look to administrators and policies and handbooks and procedures. They look at leadership. They look to leadership. And what they're asking, whether they're saying it or not, is really quite simple. Am I protected here? When the response is hesitant, when the message is mixed, when the adult enforcing the rule is scrutinized more than the behavior itself, the social contract fractures even further, because the lesson becomes enforcement is optional, but folks, the risk is guaranteed. So a lot of times people think professional development is the answer, but I'm going to tell you why it isn't the answer. This is where well-intended solutions really miss the mark. They really miss the target. When teachers struggle, we often respond with training. We'll just throw some training at them. They need to be trained. They haven't been trained. Watch this video. Go to this conference, okay? More de-escalation strategies, more relationship building frameworks, more classroom management PD. But PD assumes the problem is technique. What if the problem is courage? Or maybe the lack of? And what if courage is being demanded without that protection? No amount of training prepares someone to enforce rules in an environment where they fear retaliation. Professional, emotional, or physical. You don't fix a structural issue with a strategy, folks. And maybe people turn to using silence as a survival skill in these situations. Over time, something else begins to happen. Teachers stop talking. Not because they don't care or because they've given up, but because speaking up feels risky to them. They stop reporting incidents. They stop asking for help. They stop pushing for that consistency that they once demanded and expected. They retreat into their rooms, shut the doors, and manage what they can and what they can control. This is how isolation sets in. Sometimes I call it teaching in silos, okay? And in this case, we're talking about classroom management in silos. And isolation, folks, it accelerates burnout, is really what it does. And burnout isn't about workload alone, okay? That's a big part of burnout these days, but I'm going to tell you right now, burnout is often framed as exhaustion. You know, too many tasks, too many demands, too many responsibilities, but those moral injuries, that's just as powerful when it comes to burnout. Burnout also comes from being asked to do the impossible while being blamed when it fails. Okay? When teachers are told, just hold students accountable, build relationships, be consistent, teach with fidelity, avoid conflict, protect yourself, those messages collide with one another, and something at that point has to give. And teacher turnover, in my opinion, is a signal. It's not a flaw. It's a signal. It's a red light, folks. When teachers leave the profession, we often ask things like, why can't they handle it? But turnover, again, is not weakness. It's not about being weak. Turnover is information for us. It's a signal that the environment has become unsustainable. People don't leave because expectations exist. They leave when expectations aren't backed. So let's talk about blame for a minute. Here's the loop that we've created. So if you can just picture this in your mind for a second. Here's the loop. We expect teachers to enforce rules. Enforcement escalates. Support wavers. Teachers pull back. Inconsistency increases. Behaviors worsen. Blame classroom management. And around we go again. And around we go again. And again. And again. The loop doesn't fix a thing, folks. It doesn't fix anything. It just burns people out faster. The more that loop goes, the faster they burn out. And teachers didn't create this culture. I'm going to say that right now. And I'm back teachers all day long. Teachers did not create this culture. And this part really matters. Teachers did not normalize filming adults by students when these situations happen, when they pull out their cameras. Teachers didn't normalize that. Teachers did not frame accountability as harm. Teachers did not teach students to challenge authority in a public setting. And teachers did not remove consequences from systems. They didn't do any of those things. They didn't rewrite the rules of society. But they're expected to absorb the consequences of those changes and to do so calmly, professionally, and without complaining. Okay? That's not resilience, folks. That's not resilience. That's unfairness. That is not fair. And this whole talk today is not anti-student. Please know this is not anti-student. It's not anti-cell phone. It's not anti-rules or procedures or policies. Let me say that clearly. This conversation today, folks, is not anti-student. I truly believe that students benefit from clarity and they benefit from consistency. They benefit from boundaries that are enforced calmly and confidently by the adults in the building. What harms students the most is a system where rules exist, but enforcement is unpredictable. How many people have been in a building like that where the enforcement, you just don't know what's going to happen? And by golly, I hope none of my current teachers, former teachers, past teachers think of me when they hear that expression. Enforcement is unpredictable or isn't predictable. You know, where adults or administrators hesitate, where accountability depends on who's watching. That's not freedom, folks. That's confusion, okay? And I'm going to name the real problem now. You know, when we say classroom management didn't fail, what we're really saying is this. The strategies still work if that foundation is still there. But when social contract collapse, no strategy can compensate in that loss. It isn't about teachers needing to be better or do better. It's about systems needing to be braver. So up to this point, almost 20 minutes into the talk today, folks, up to this point, we've talked about what broke, how it broke, and why blaming classroom management misses the point. So now we have to talk about responsibility. Again, not blame, but responsibility, because acknowledging a broken social contract doesn't mean shrugging and moving on. Okay, well, I'm just going to go ahead and move on my way. It means leadership really matters now more than ever. And leadership doesn't start with slogans and t-shirts. It starts with backing people when it's uncomfortable. what backing teacher actually looks like. It means supporting teachers, and supporting teachers doesn't mean defending every decision blindly. It means this: when a rule is enforced respectfully, consistently, the adult enforcing that rule is not treated like the problem. It means that the behavior is addressed before the tone is dissected. All right? It means the first question isn't, what could the teacher have done differently in this situation? But rather, what expectation was violated and how did we restore it? That shift alone changes everything because it tells teachers they're not alone. So what's the cost of hesitation then? When systems hesitate, teachers notice. When administrators hesitate, teachers notice. They notice when things like language gets softened after pushback, or consequences quietly disappear. Policies exist on paper but not in practice. Students notice those things too, folks. They learn quickly where the real limits are. Not the posted ones, not the enforced ones, but when enforcement depends on who complains the loudest, authority collapses. And the classroom becomes a negotiation space instead of learning spaces. Clarity is not cruelty. Somewhere along the way, clarity got confused with harshness. But clarity is kind and can be kind. Clear expectations actually reduce anxiety on everybody's part, the student, the teacher, the adult. Clear consequences reduce conflict. Clear backing reduces fear. When everyone knows where the line is and that it will be held, fewer people test it. That's not control, that's stability, folks. Parents are part of that contract too. The social contract doesn't exist only inside the school walls. Families, parents, they play their role too. Not by agreeing with every rule. We don't expect parents to agree with every rule. That's never probably going to happen. In a perfect world, maybe. But by reinforcing the idea that adults at schools deserve respect. That's what we need parents to actually do. I guess that old saying of we can agree to disagree on the rules is one thing, but adults, parents, we need you to reinforce the idea that the grown-ups at the school, at the end of the day, deserve your respect and the students' respect. That's all we really are asking. That conversation and those conversations happen privately, not publicly. That accountability is part of growth. It's not part of punishment. When schools and families can work and come together, that's when good things happen. When they work against each other, students get caught in the middle. And when students are caught in the middle, they learn to exploit that gap. And that's not their fault. That's just human nature. This is why teachers end up feeling exhausted. The teachers aren't just tired from teaching. That's a whole different tired all by itself. They're tired from navigating the uncertainty, folks. From the wondering, will I be supported? Will this be worth it? Is this the hill I want to die on? Will this come back on me? That constant calculation drains energy faster than any lesson planning workload ever could. Burnout doesn't come from expectations. It comes from unsupported expectations. So silence isn't strength. When teachers stop speaking up, systems often misread it. They think things like, things must be better. But silence is not peace. Silence is survival. Okay? I've been there. I've been the silent one at times just to survive. It's what happens when people learn that honesty carries consequences. And when silence spreads, innovation dies with it. So let's call it what it is. It is what it is. Let's say it again, clearly and without apology. Classroom management didn't fail. The social contract did. Again, the title of this week's episode. Classroom management didn't fail. The social contract did. And teachers didn't suddenly forget how to teach, folks. Students didn't suddenly become unmanageable. Schools didn't suddenly lose structure. Again, what changed was the shared agreement that enforcement is legitimate and that adults will be supported when they do it well. Somewhere we've lost that. And until we're honest about that, we'll keep offering the wrong solutions. So what rebuilding the contract actually requires, in my opinion, rebuilding the social contract is not going to be easy. It requires things like courage from the leadership and the administrators, consistency from those systems that are put in place, partnerships from families, trust from communities and families. It requires saying things like, we will handle conflict without abandoning our people. It requires standing firm even when it doesn't feel good, when it's uncomfortable. And I think that's when you know you're doing something for the right reason. When it feels uncomfortable sometimes, I think that's your reassurance that you're doing the right thing. Because comfort has become a poor substitute for clarity. This is not about going backwards. It isn't about returning to the past. We can't go back to the past. I wish we could some days. Life was easier back then, folks. This isn't about returning to the past. It's about restoring the balance that we need. A balance where students are respected, teachers are protected, expectations are enforced, learning can actually happen. Progress doesn't mean removing boundaries. It means enforcing them with humanity and backing the people who do. So let me give a final word to my teachers, friends out there. I love you, teachers. If you're listening to this as a teacher today, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not failing, okay? Pat your back, give yourself a high five. You're not failing. You're not weak. Give a little flex, teachers, right now. You're not weak. You're not bad at classroom management because a system made enforcement risky. Okay? You are not bad at management. The system made that enforcement risky. You are responding to the environment that you were placed in. All right, I'm going to say that again, teachers. You are responding to the environment that you have been placed in. And your hesitation is not incompetence. It's really self-preservation. Let me give a final word to leaders out there. If you're listening today as a leader, administrator, principal, assistant principal, dean of students, this is the moment that matters. So tune in now. Get those listening ears on, as we tell our students sometimes. It's not the memo. It's not the initiative. It's not the PD session, folks. Okay, administrators, listen. The moment someone enforces a rule and then looks to see if you'll stand with them, that moment determines everything. Okay? The moment someone enforces a rule and looks to see if you'll stand with them, that's where it determines everything. That's the defining moment. Classroom management was never meant to include fear. It was meant to be supported by a shared understanding that adults enforcing expectations deserve respect and they deserve dignity. Until we restore that understanding, no strategy, no policy, no handbook is going to save us. But what if we do? What if teaching becomes possible again? Think about that. And that's where I'm going to leave you. Let's make teaching become possible again. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening this week. This was kind of a heavy episode. a lot of things for you to absorb and chew on and let it just sit and marinate in your brains there, folks, for a couple of days. Maybe come back and listen to this one again. I hit you with a lot. All from a Facebook post. I'm going to start looking at some of my educational sites and scrolling a little more closely and looking for things that I can pull out and bring here to you to debate, to talk about, to share the information on. Okay, that's what Interventions and Detentions is all about. Sharing information. Thanks again for tuning in, folks. Thanks for listening each week. Keep sharing our social media posts. I'm trying to increase my TikTok level of publicity. I don't know. That's a long saying for just saying I'm trying to get myself out there on TikTok a little bit more. Facebook, LinkedIn, Insta, And don't forget that you can check this out on pretty much any podcasting platform out there. Share it with your friends. Tell your friends about it. Say, hey, tune into Interventions and Detentions. Still working on getting some more guests lined up. Just trying to get schedules to mesh and line up. But we will make that happen soon. So if you're still holding the line, quietly, consistently, courageously, know this, folks. Just know this, as I'm going to leave you with a little piece of information. You're not alone. You're not alone in those things. You know, this episode, hopefully, if it resonated, share it with someone who needs to hear it, okay? Whether that be teachers, administrators, parents, whatever. Again, remember, we are not alone, okay? Lean on each other. Whew! Like I said, heavy topic this week. But it was one that just jumped off that screen on Facebook and screamed a little bit at me and said, hey, we need to talk about this. I appreciate everyone joining me each week. Keep tuning in, folks. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the support. If you've got ideas or topics you want me to hit on and share, let me know. If you say, hey, Brad, I want to jump on the podcast with you, hit me up. We can do it remotely. It works great, easy to do. So I'd love to have some people out there that I've never met in person want to join me and talk for a half hour, 45 minutes about education. Okay, it's what I do every day, and I love it, and I love you guys for listening. Thanks for listening again to Interventions and Detentions. Tune in every week. Episodes drop Friday morning at 8. Interventions and Detentions, folks. It's where the real learning begins. See you next week.